Divine Mercy Miracles. Taken from the book, God Exists. The evidence. Full permission has been granted to the uploader of this video, to audio and use this section, from Sacred Heart Publications UK. It is not possible to relay all of the miracles connected to the Divine Mercy and the promise Jesus made to mankind in regards to the image in the chaplet. To list all would fill many books by themselves. There is much less written about the miracles than has taken place. This is because they are often personal and people do not report them. For instance, a gentleman from America bought himself an alarm watch which he set to off at 3 p.m. At this time every day, whether he was working or at leisure, he would pray the chaplet. One time, he was ill and an operation was scheduled, which meant he was unable to pray the chaplet on that day. He was somewhat anxious, the operation was risky. He was being prepared just before the hour of Divine Mercy, and silently he prayed asking Jesus to forgive him for not being able to pray the chaplet. He described that, after he had prayed, he looked up and saw Jesus as he is shown in the Divine Mercy image. Jesus smiled at him. This is one personal account out of thousands that has never been made public. In 1993, there was a miracle that is not well known. The events surrounding it are undeniable, and because of its nature it is surprising that it never made international front page news headlines. It should have done. It never left the tight-knit Christian circle, when in truth, it is God, and so every human being has a right to be told. Stanley Villavicencio was born in Base, Negros Oriental in the Philippines. He was raised a Roman Catholic, and had a great devotion to the Sacred Heart, Divine Love, of Jesus Christ. It is a devotion that started when he was in grade school at the Sacred Heart Academy in Base, Negro Oriental. He married a nurse, Melissa Ganchanco Villa, and moved to Cebu in Mambaling. Close to his house was a chapel dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. This had a great bearing on his decision to buy the house. Unfortunately, after moving, it was discovered that the chapel was portable, erected only during the fiesta celebration and dismantled afterwards. In 1983, Stanley became chapel president. A neighbor donated some land close by in order for a permanent chapel to be built for the Christian community. Stanley was basically an ordinary man. In 1993, he was an employee of AVSECOM, the Aviation Security Command. He also became a member of the Perpetual Dawn Rosary Association in Cebu. In the Cebu Roman Catholic community, there is a tradition that whenever a special family occasion occurs in a household, the head of the family receives into the home a large statue of the Virgin Mary. March 2, 1993 is a birthday of one of Stanley's children, therefore, that morning, he was to receive the statue. However, when the statue arrived just before 8 o'clock in the morning, Stanley was not up and, so his mother-in-law received it. Being concerned, she entered Stanley's bedroom. Stanley, the night before he retired, was perfectly healthy. But this particular morning his mother-in-law found him convulsing. Blood was spurting from his mouth with incredible force. She felt his pulse which was too weak to detect. When she forced open his eyes, they were white. An ambulance was called, and Stanley was taken to Chanhua Hospital in Cebu. He was rushed to the emergency room. There, still bleeding profusely from his mouth, and convulsing, he was injected with the maximum dose of Valium, to try to stop the convulsions and slow down the huge quantity of blood pouring from his mouth. The doctors ran all sorts of tests. They could not locate the source of the bleeding, nor any kind of illness. They took a blood test with view of giving him a blood transfusion, but his blood count was normal, which medically was impossible. It meant that his body was not short of blood, despite the fact he had lost so much blood. Stanley slipped into a coma. His heartbeat became slower, his skin color turned gray, and then he stopped breathing. He was rushed to the intensive care unit, where a specialist inserted an ambu bag, the end tracheal tube being placed through his nose, going down to his stomach. This was the only form of life support that the hospital had available. An IV drip was placed into a vein in his hand, running dextrose fluid into his system. However, very quickly, Stanley's organs shut down. He was declared brain dead. His family at first did not believe this, mainly because Stanley had shown no previous signs of being ill and the doctors were unable to determine what was wrong. However, by the second day, the family prepared for Stanley's funeral. His coffin was arranged, a burial plot, and a burial gown. By the third day, Stanley's blood had congealed in the bottom of his legs and feet and rigor mortis begun to set in. Early in the morning on the third day, Stanley's wife brought the burial gown to the hospital to prepare her husband. Neighbors gathered outside of the chapel to receive Stanley's coffin. Flowers were laid out for the wake. A death certificate was already signed. But Stanley came back from the dead, perfectly healthy, as if nothing had happened. While his heart was flatline, his brain dead, Stanley had in spirit met for the first time Jesus Christ of the Divine Mercy. Now, the fact is that all of Stanley's medical records show this happened. He was first in a coma and then dead. Every sequence of his medical attention was, as is the custom, documented. On investigation, these records were examined, and all medical staff involved questioned. Stanley came to England in the year 2001. Here, he very kindly gave an interview, in which he described the events and his experience during death, and how after he was sent back with a mission. This is his testimony. No attempt has been made to edit Stanley's account or accent, the way he speaks the English language. Before I will give my testimony, I just want to inform you that, after what happened to me, I was just going round giving my testimony in my own dialect. You see, the Philippines is composed of more than 700 islands and almost every island has different dialect. The Philippines is divided into three major parts, Luzon, Mindanao and Visayas. I belong to Visayas, because I'm living in Cebu. So I was giving my testimony in Visayas only, until one time Father Seraphim Micalanco, the spiritual director of the Divine Mercy Nationwide, invited me to give a talk in Manila. At first, I'm happy, because I can go to Manila, but then a day before I was so worried, because I do not know how to speak the dialect, because in Manila the dialect is Galo, and I do not know how to speak the Galo. I was worried, and so I asked the Lord, what shall I do? Then the following day, early in the morning, Jesus appeared to me, to my dream, and said, do not worry. Just do your best, and I shall do the rest. So I went to Manila, and when I'm holding the microphone to give my testimony, I'm thinking my testimony in my own local dialect, and it came out in the Galo. So they understand me. And now comes Father Seraphim, the head of the Divine Mercy International based in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, USA. He invited me to give a series of talks in the United States, Canada and Mexico, and the problem is, I do not know how to speak the English. So again I was worried, and because in Cebu, the owner of the university, is a Divine Mercy devotee, so he instructed the English department to translate my testimony from our local dialect to English, and after several months they finish the translation. They give it to me, and it is as thick as this. And they said to me, Stanley, you memorize that. And I said no. I cannot memorize it anymore. Then they said, okay, you just read it, and I said, I cannot read it also, because it is my testimony. If I will read it, it will be lifeless. So I went to America, leaving behind the translation, and upon reaching the States I confided to Father Seraphim everything. So Father Seraphim was so worried, because my first testimony will be at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., and I will be speaking together with Mother Angelica. The audience is almost 7,000. Father Seraphim was so worried, so I told him, Father, don't worry. Anyway, I did not come to America to proclaim my mercy, I'm here to proclaim God's mercy. So when I was holding the microphone, I'm thinking of my own local dialect, but then it came out English, and after that I already know how to speak English. What I'm going to tell you is what happened to me. About my own personal encounter with Jesus Christ of the Divine Mercy. When you hear my testimony, I hope it will increase your faith, and that you know that there really is a God, and that God is a living God. What happened to me happened on March 2nd, 1993. That was a Tuesday and a birthday of one of my children. By the way, I had 10 children, but now I have 13. And by the way, I'm a member of the Perpetual Dawn Rosary. It is our practice that, whenever there is an occasion at our house, we invite the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it is also our practice that, whenever the Virgin comes into our house, it is I who has to receive the Virgin. But on that day, when the Virgin is already in our house, whatever they do to wake me up, I cannot be awakened, so it is my mother-in-law who received the Virgin. At 8 o'clock that morning, my mother-in-law said she heard me moaning and moaning. So she tried to look at me in my room, and she found me lying in bed, trembling vigorously, blood coming out of my mouth forcefully. And it was the sister of my father-in-law, who is a nurse, was present, so attended to me immediately. And as she touches my pulse, she cannot find any pulse anymore, and as she touches my chest, my heartbeat is already very slow. And when they open my eyes, both eyes are already in white, so they asked help from our neighbors, and they brought me to Changhua Hospital. At Changhua Hospital, we have 4 specialist doctors, and the doctor said that my chance of survival is 1 in a million, because my heartbeat is already slow. As I enter the emergency room, I cannot breathe anymore, even with the help of oxygen, so they transferred me to ICU or the intensive care unit, so my breathing can be aided, or forcing oxygen inside. At the ICU my trembling did not stop, and the blood was still coming out from my mouth, so the doctor injected me with Valium to control everything. Because Negros Island and Cebu are just very near, so that day my relatives arrive. Among them is my father, who is a doctor, and my sister, who is also a doctor, and the cousin of my wife were already present. By the way, my wife is also a nurse. The following day, the doctors called up my wife and asked her permission to take me off of all the life support apparatus. So my wife called up our house and asked that my long sleeve shirt for my burial be prepared. And my mother-in-law says she has a memorial plan, and that her memorial plan is transferable. So she had it transferred to my name. Meaning, I will be the one using her coffin. And it also happened we had a reservation at the Queen City Garden Cemetery in Cebu, because when my father-in-law died in 1987, we bought 3 lots, so they process all the papers, so they can bring me to the Queen City Garden. Meaning, everything is already ready. I have the long shirt to wear for my burial, I have already a coffin to sleep in, I have already a cemetery to live in. But God had a different plan, because my wife did not agree to remove the life support apparatus attached to my body. In fact, my relatives, they take in turns to watch over me. But it is only my body present at Changhua Hospital, because I saw a light, a very big bright light, but not glaring. You can stare at it. It is like a fountain. It is like a fog as it slowly evaporates, until I notice someone is standing in front of me. And when I look at his